She throws a glass, but it does not shatter. You blink, and the moment has already passed. Her rage hangs mid-air, unclaimed. You said nothing, not because you are kind, not because you are afraid, but because the arena has collapsed. She cannot duel you in silence, and that terrifies her. You are no longer prey. You have become terrain, unmoved, unseduced. She was prepared for the scream, the logic, the wounded plea, not for a man who has killed his appetite for approval. There is no battle if one warrior vanishes mid-swing. There is no power if the mirror doesn't flinch. You aren't silent to keep peace. You are silent because you see the game. You don't withdraw, you dismantle. You make her realize her tactics only echo in her own skull. And now, she has no one to blame but the silence. If this voice already walked through your spine, leave your trace. Like the video. Comment with the moment you first vanished. Subscribe and stay beyond the reach of noise. You were born to flinch, not as a weakness, but as a ritual. The boyhood instinct taught in glances, shaped by praise that when she cries, you bend. When she scorns, you explain. When she performs, you applaud. Your earliest survival was this: be soft when she storms, be warm when she's cold, bleed when she needs to feel clean. But something broke in you that didn't bleed. And now she stares into your face and finds only the silence of an empty cathedral. You don't argue, not because you lack words, but because the words are fossils now too old, too buried, too hollow to feed anyone's drama. Her anger once had meaning, your rebuttals once danced like wounded birds, but the man you've become no longer dances. You witness, you don't react. And for a woman who thrives on emotional choreography, your stillness is the final insult. She wants to see herself reflected in your shame, in your raised voice, in your need to be right. But the mirror won't shatter anymore. It doesn't even tremble. Do you know what kind of fear that creates? A man who doesn't argue is not a man who lacks emotion. He's a man who has learned the currency of emotion too well. You have paid the price for every escalation, every useless apology, every drama you once swallowed whole. And in that economy, you went bankrupt. Now, you no longer trade in drama. You've gone off-grid. She tries to bait you with sorrow, but you don't bite. She crafts an accusation laced with historical venom, but you don't correct it. She builds a stage out of silence, hoping you'll step on and play your part. But your costume has rotted, and your lines are ashes. Her fury is no longer a weapon, it's a monologue without a witness. And Nietzsche smiles, because this is the moment you become dangerous. Not by power, but by absence. You are no longer there to be shaped. You once believed that love meant engagement, that to care was to defend, to prove, to wrestle your truth into her approval. But now you know something deeper. What cannot be distorted cannot be possessed, and what cannot be possessed becomes terrifying. She cannot find herself in your stillness, so she calls you cold, she calls you heartless, she calls you manipulative. But all you've done is vanish from the script. She is terrified, not because you yell, but because you won't. Because her story no longer lives inside you. You are no longer the mirror that helps her pretend. You are the void that shows her truth. The performance falls apart when no one claps, and she claps alone. You walk through the house like weather, present, untouchable. She throws objects not at you, but toward you. A slammed door, a dropped plate, a sigh weaponized with memory. But there is no battlefield when one general leaves. And now she's at war with a shadow. You sit quietly, not because you don't feel, but because your feelings are no longer available for her theater. You've reclaimed them. You've stopped letting her emotions rent space in your nervous system. You no longer host her storms. You've moved inland. She says you're emotionally unavailable, but what she really means is you're no longer her puppet. You've severed the strings. You don't argue because you know how the arguments end. Her victory isn't in logic. It's in watching you bend, and you won't bend anymore. That's what women fear about the man who doesn't argue. Not his cruelty, not his silence, but his freedom. Because if you don't need to win her approval, then what anchors her power? What proves her worth? What reflects her back to herself? She wants to believe she has command over the room, the tone, the emotional weather. But you became the weather. You became the season that doesn't change for anyone. It's not that you're cold. You're stable, and stability true, wild. Inner stability is the one thing manipulation cannot digest. You once tried to reason with the unreasonable, tried to pour meaning into chaos, tried to stitch truth into a garment made of moods. But now, you just leave the threads on the table. She accuses you of being detached. Detached from what? The drama, the cycle, the ritual of staged pain. You're not detached, you're free. And freedom is sterile to someone addicted to performance. You walk away from fights not because you can't fight, but because you no longer believe in the rules of the game. Her provocations are like chess pieces on a board you burned. She moves her queen with flair. You sip your tea. It is not a performance anymore. It is not a debate. It is not love measured by how long you endure her storm. You don't raise your voice. You raise your standard. And that standard is silence in the face of chaos. She can't climb inside your silence anymore. She knocks on your chest, looking for the buttons to push. But you remove them in the night. She screams louder not because you hurt her, but because you didn't react when she tried. And now the real horror begins. She starts hearing her own voice echo back, and it terrifies her, because it was never about you. It was never your flaw. It was never your rage. It was her script, her need, her hunger to see herself in your unraveling. But you won't unravel anymore. You've become a mirror that won't shatter, a mirror that shows her exactly what she is. And that's the one reflection she never wanted. So she leaves, or she weeps, or she claws for softness in your eyes. And you sit still, not because you hate her, but because you see her. And sometimes, to see someone clearly is the cruelest thing you can do. Let her call it cold. Let her name it narcissism, emotional distance, cruelty. But deep down, she knows you didn't stop loving. You just stopped losing yourself in the name of it. She fears the man who doesn't argue because he is no longer fuel, no longer audience, no longer mirror. He is presence without permission. He is stillness without submission. And that, for a woman used to building power through reaction, is the end of the game. You used to think the chaos was personal, that each outburst had meaning, each contradiction hid a wound, each provocation deserved compassion. You stayed on that stage, night after night, believing that if you listened closely enough, if you responded with just the right tone, she would finally stop performing and begin to speak. But she never did, because her performance was never aimed at you. It was aimed at the emptiness inside her, and you were just the audience she needed to pretend it wasn't there. She needed a witness, a reaction, a man who would shiver under her moods, who would take her shifting emotions and build them into architecture, something real, something solid, something she could point to and say, "This is who I am." But you stopped doing that. You turned off the spotlight. Now she performs into darkness, and it terrifies her, because without your attention, her pain does not echo. Without your gaze, her anger does not carve shapes. Without your presence as the screen, her projection collapses inward. You didn't reject her. You removed the theater, and she never wanted a relationship, she wanted a stage. You used to respond to her every flinch like it was Morse code. The sighs, the turned back, the faint but deliberate silence, each one a signal begging to be deciphered. You took the bait because you believed the signal meant intimacy, that if you read it correctly, she'd come closer. But you were decoding a script written to keep you guessing, not to let you in. Now, when she sighs, you don't ask. When she withdraws, you let her drift. When she lashes out, you let the words fall to the ground like spoiled fruit. And she hates it, not because she wanted a fight, but because your refusal to engage reveals the hollowness of the scene. The lights don't flicker, the crowd doesn't gasp, the curtain doesn't rise. She begins to wonder who she is when no one's watching. That is your power now. Not dominance, not defiance, but absence of reaction. Not the coldness of a man withholding affection, but the clarity of a man who no longer gives his soul to a puppet show. She once called you her rock, but rocks don't applaud, and she wanted applause disguised as stability. You remember how she used to walk out of rooms just to be chased. Now, when the door closes, you pour yourself a drink and finish reading the paragraph. You didn't abandon her, you abandoned the performance. And when she returns, she's changed. Not softer, not clearer, but louder, more confused. Because she thought she was the storm. But you didn't bring an umbrella, you just stayed dry. You stopped believing that love is measured by how well you absorb chaos. Now you understand the more you react, the less she respects you, and the more she disrespects you, the more chaos she creates to test your center. It was never about resolution, it was always about reflection. She wanted to see herself inside your collapse, but you've stopped collapsing. So she escalates. She spins tales from wounds that never healed. She whispers regrets that don't belong to you. She reaches for every lever she used to pull guilt, seduction, logic, nostalgia, and they don't work anymore. Because your attention has become sacred, not a prize, not a negotiation, but a boundary. She cannot perform her pain into meaning without your gaze, and you won't offer it not because you're cruel, but because you finally know the cost. Your gaze was currency, and she spent it to avoid looking inward. Now she has to sit with the echo. She has to face the absence. She has to confront the terrifying truth that maybe, just maybe, she was never trying to connect at all, only to control. You were the spotlight, the feedback loop, the applause. Now you are simply present, not passive, not aggressive, just unhooked. She says you've changed, and she's right. You stopped chasing meaning where there was only performance. You stopped assigning value to moods that vanish the next day. You stopped calling her unpredictability passion. You stopped romanticizing confusion. And now, stripped of your attention, she has only herself. And that is the one person she's always avoided. You watch her try to provoke you with intimacy, a sudden compliment, a vulnerable memory, an attempt to seduce you back into the game. But you don't play. You know the pattern softness is the bait. You take it, and the trap resets. You feel like the savior until you're the villain again. So now, when she smiles like a ghost from a life you barely remember, you don't respond. You nod, you sip your coffee, and the silence swallows the scene. She can't understand this version of you, this version who listens without trying to fix, who observes without offering explanation, who feels without performing feeling. Because if you don't respond to her theatrics, then she is not the star. She's just a woman in a quiet room, talking to herself. And that is unbearable. She blames your detachment, your coldness, your disinterest. But what she truly mourns is the loss of control. Your presence used to shape her identity. Now, it simply reflects what's already there. You are no longer the spotlight. You are the silence after the curtain falls. Let her call it distance. Let her call it the end. You know what it is. It's the truth stripped of attention. It's the soul without witness. It's the performance with no one watching, and still you remain quiet, whole, unbroken. She may stay, she may go, but the stage is gone, and your piece will never be the backdrop again. She used to control the room with absence, the glance, the turned back, the delay in reply. You knew the pattern. Her silence wasn't silence. It was a performance designed to pull you toward the fire. And it worked. You rushed in with apologies she never asked for. You filled in the gaps with meanings she never meant. You bent before the question was even spoken. But now she disappears and you don't follow. Now she cries and you don't kneel. Now she tests you and the test fails to matter. You've built something she can't dismantle. Not a wall, not a mask, a throne, a seat made of stillness and survival. You don't sit on it because you're above her. You sit because you are no longer inside her storm. That throne cost you everything. The nights you screamed into your own palms, the mornings you rewrote texts before sending them, the shame of begging for clarity she never intended to give. You thought you were seeking truth, but you were only seeking her permission to feel whole. Now you no longer need her permission, and that changes everything. She doesn't understand this version of you, this man who doesn't flinch, who hears her accusations and doesn't defend, who hears her compliments and doesn't melt, who witnesses her rage and stays calm not because he is numb, but because he has already drowned in that sea and clawed his way back to shore. You're not avoiding the fight. You've simply seen the script. You know your line. You've said it. You've left the stage. She tries new tactics, tears, memories, seduction, promises of softness, but all of them come wrapped in the same box, a demand for you to surrender your center again. And you won't. Not because you're trying to win, but because you're no longer playing. This isn't victory, it's sovereignty. There's a difference between winning an argument and refusing to fight a war you never declared. The man who no longer argues terrifies her because he reflects back something she tried to bury, her own need for control. Without your reaction, she's left alone with herself. The silence begins to echo. The room grows colder, not because you froze it, but because your warmth is no longer available on demand. You have taken your warmth back, and that is the true throne. It's not detachment, it's sacred space. It's knowing that if your attention is the only thing anchoring her emotions, then she was never grounded to begin with, and you will not be the ground anymore. She used to believe your silence was punishment. Now she sees its protection of yourself, of your peace, of the self that took too long to crawl out of her labyrinth. The man who reigns over himself does not raise his voice. He raises his standard, and your standard is this: you will not bleed so someone else can feel alive. You will not explain yourself just to be misunderstood again. You will not step back into the fire after you've already buried the ashes. She starts to tremble not because you've hurt her, but because you no longer need her to stop hurting you. That need was her power, and now it's gone. You don't correct her version of events. You don't chase her approval. You don't clarify your tone, your mood, your silence, because you've realized something brutal and liberating. Your truth doesn't require her understanding. This is the throne, the place where nothing outside you determines your inner weather. It's not arrogance, it's refusal to be a mirror. She always wanted a mirror to reflect her importance, her pain, her passion, but you've shattered that mirror, and now all she sees is herself. She can't love this man, not yet, because this man doesn't bend, this man doesn't beg, this man doesn't break so she can feel whole again. This man is whole without her, and wholeness, to someone addicted to drama, feels like starvation. You still feel, you still ache. But your ache is no longer currency. You do not trade it for peace, for sex, for a few kind words before the next cycle begins. You sit in it, you own it, you throne in it, and because of that, you are free. She calls it emotional unavailability, but what she really means is you no longer offer yourself as a sacrifice. You stopped apologizing for boundaries. You stopped explaining your need for silence. You stopped allowing chaos to redefine love, because love is not chaos. Love is presence without invasion. Love is honesty without performance. Love is you, staying whole even when she starts to crack. She is not used to that. She's used to being the fire that consumes, but you became fireproof. Now she stands before you with all her old weapons, and none of them pierce, because you're not playing defense. You're not playing at all. She thought she feared abandonment, but what she truly fears is the man who does not return, not physically, but emotionally, not for the moment, but for the pattern. You've exited the loop, and that's what breaks her. You don't gloat, you don't punish, you don't explain. You exist, and that, for a woman who built her power on your instability, is the most devastating thing of all. Let her call you cold, let her name your silence a flaw, but you know the truth. This silence, this stillness, this throne, it is not absence, it is self-possession. It is you no longer leaking yourself just to keep love on the table. It is you no longer setting yourself on fire just to keep the house warm. It is you no longer turning every conflict into a sermon, every mood into a puzzle, every insult into an invitation. You sit, you breathe, you reign, and if she cannot meet you there, then she will scream into the hallway of her own echoes. Because you do not chase, you do not plead, you do not return. You built the throne, and you stay on it. Not because you need to be above her, but because the only man who is truly untouchable is the one who no longer performs. She stands barefoot in a hall of mirrors, but none reflect. The glass has gone dark. The light has moved elsewhere. Her hands, once rehearsed in pulling you back, now tremble without choreography. Somewhere, a chair remains empty, not from absence, but from arrival, because you are no longer where she last saw you. No voice, no final gesture, no revenge. Just the scent of a door that closed before it slammed. Just the echo of your presence withdrawing without warning, like smoke that chose not to rise. She will tell herself stories that you never cared, that you changed, that you feared her too much to stay. But deep down, beneath her fury, beneath the silence she cannot fill, she knows you didn't vanish. You ascended. And the man who ascends never looks back at the one who needed him to fall to feel tall. Let her look up. There is no answer, only sky.